Welcome to the Healing Pain Podcast with Dr. Joe Tatta. Each week, we interview top experts in physical therapy, pain science, and integrative pain care. You'll learn the most up-to-date information for treating and reversing persistent pain. This podcast is for educational purposes only and not intended to be used as personalized medical advice. And now, here's your host, Dr. Joe Tatta.
Hey there, friend. Welcome back to this week's episode. Today, we're discussing how to build mind-body strength and resilience. My expert guest this week is Dr. Scotty Butcher. Scotty is a physical therapist and also trained as a respiratory exercise physiologist, a strength and conditioning specialist, and a meditation and mindfulness teacher. He currently teaches and conducts research on the integrative mind-body practices of strength training and mindfulness in healthy individuals, older adults, and those with chronic disease. On today's episode, we discuss the implications of mindfulness for both physical as well as mental health and well-being, tips and strategies for improving mind-body strength and resilience, the controversy around Polyvagal Theory and how it applies to physical therapist practice, and examples of mindfulness in movies and popular culture. Techniques to build mind-body resilience obviously sit well within the scope of physical therapy practice and many other healthcare practitioners. This is a topic that really speaks to our population of not only providers, but of course, people who are interested in improving their health and well-being, specifically people with chronic pain. It's a topic that we'll spend more time on as we evolve in the Healing Pain podcast. Specifically, I'll be looking more into mental health physical therapy and how the treatments that we use as physical therapists, exercise, physical activity, manual therapy, different types of modalities, lifestyle-based interventions, how they can all have an impact not only on our physical well-being, but also our mental well-being, and how we can start to educate, of course, the communities we interact with, either in our hometowns or broadly social media, public health, and even politics, because there's a place for this with regard to evolving the topic and the conversation around physical well-being and mental well-being in PT practice and healthcare in general. So stay tuned for more. If you're enjoying the Healing Pain podcast, please make sure to head on over to iTunes, leave us a 5-star review and say something nice about us. It really does help us increase awareness about the podcast and the overall message that it sends. Okay, without further ado, let's begin and let's meet Dr. Scotty Butcher. Hey there, Scotty. Welcome to the Healing Pain podcast. It's great to have you on this week.
Thanks, Joe. Awesome to be here, man.
Likewise. I'm happy that you joined us this week to talk about mind-body strength and resilience and kind of biohacking and really what all that means to you. I know you've studied this, kind of on a research level through your PhD a little bit, and you're exploring new research endeavors now, which I want to kind of hear about and we'll talk to. But, the word biohacking is used a lot. You see it online. It's in, blog post titles and things like that. I think a good place for us to start as we kind of dive into mind-body strength and resilience is, what does biohacking, mean to you as a physiotherapist and a researcher?
Yeah, great question. So biohacking for me is just any method that you have that of self-improvement and resilience building. And this is through personal practices, right? So things that you do in terms of self-care and that. But the key and the cool thing about it is I'm a pretty big nerd. So I really like technology and integrating tech into it. And so it's to me, it's using the current technology, which has boomed in the last few years in terms of what's available to you. And so, biohacking can be something as simple as just doing basic self-care, so mindful practices, doing exercise on a regular basis. For me, it's physical activity and strength training in combination with mindful-based practices. I mean, of course, sleep hygiene, nutrition. I know you're big into a lot of those aspects of it as well. But then it's developing a practice that's very intentional to me. And I think that's really the aspect of it. It's intentionally developing some interoception and learning to listen to your body, whether it be through tech type tech type devices, or whether it be just through, really listening to what your body is telling you. And so for me, I'm doing a lot of things around, heart rate variability, biofeedback, looking at measuring my resonance frequencies, which we could talk about if that's not familiar to any of your listeners. I'm doing some EEG biofeedback, which is completely out of my realm in terms of professionally, but it's super cool to assist mindfulness-based practices. And then I'm starting to get into doing a lot of exercise-related tracking, heart rate variability, heart rate responses, thinking about the applications of Polyvagal Theory and how that relates to exercise responses, and in sort of a holistic, integrated type response. So to me, it's kind of a combination of a lot of that stuff.
I like how you're bringing the technology in with the research and the practice. I know there's a lot of that out there. It seems to me right now we have a lot of technology, a lot of apps out there, more and more things that can run on your computer or on your cell phone. But I appreciate people like you start to kind of test the technology, because not all of them are great. And then some of them are really wonderful that, like heart rate variability, I think is underutilized in the PT world. I'm glad you're starting to do a little bit of research in that area. How did you get to this place though, where you're like, all right, kind of started out as a physio, clinical practice, you did your PhD, I think with a focus on strength training. Is that right?
Well, it was on exercise physiology and respiratory physiology. So it was kind of a combination. And so it was strength and conditioning, but I also had a respiratory physiology flavor because I was really interested at the time on pulmonary rehab. And so rehab for people with COPD. And so I did a lot of my work in understanding the exercise limitations to individuals with ventilatory limitations. And what really led me down the path of strength training being that, when you can't train centrally, when your lungs and the heart are limiting factors, you have to think about training peripherally and what that actually looks like. And so it sort of led me down the path of strength training. But so there's two sort of things that brought me into what I'm doing currently, and one's on the personal side and one's on the professional side. And personally, I have struggled, dealt with, been present with anxiety and bouts of depression at varying points in time in my life. And what I've really come to understand with understanding my anxiety is that it really is about developing awareness. And for me, it's this interoception that I spoke about earlier is something that I think is really, really vital to understanding that. And so for me personally, mindfulness and the biohacking really made a lot of sense in terms of dealing with the issues that I was dealing with and the mental concerns that I was having, and how to recognize what my anxiety was and what it was doing to me physiologically. But then on the professional side, I was doing a lot of work in strength training and in with older adults for an example. And I was hearing things that I wasn't measuring in terms of my research. I have a lot of physiological and physical measures, but I was hearing stories, and I was hearing stories that sounded a lot like resilience to me, and things that people were able to do better and cope with challenges better. And I wasn't capturing that through my research. And so what really that led me to is thinking about, well, how can we capture resilience? And as part of that, I then came back to the mindfulness aspect with a big relationship between resilience and mindfulness. And so my personal and my professional world kind of all clashed, and now it's all kind of melded into the same thing. And so the things that I do for research are the things that I'm trialing myself personally. And so I really am a big believer of, if you're going to do something for research, it should be practice based. And so I'm being an N of one on myself right now, and then I can translate that to what I do with my research.
That's great. I mean, I think we need more N of one case studies, especially in the realm of chronic pain. So I appreciate that. So you mentioned the word resilience, which people hear the word resilience and it almost automatically makes sense to them. Everyone wants to be resilient. A lot of people think of themselves as resilient, even though they may or may not be resilient. How do you define resiliency?
Good question. As a general, I mean, there's tons out there, right? Tons of different definitions depending on who you talk to and who you read. I mean, as a general rule of thumb, it's the ability to bounce back. And whether that's a challenge that's physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, any aspect of the biopsychosocial spectrum, you can have resilience or less resilience. And it's, so it is dealing with challenges, but I think that there's a missing piece that Robin Hanley Defoe, in one of her most recent books, she's a psychologist out of Toronto, Canada, and she talks about the idea of being able to do hard things as part of resilience and building capacity. And so this is where I think a lot of where the strength training aspects that I'm involved with, as well as the mental training aspects, can help you build that capacity as well as your ability to bounce back. So for me, it's a combination of those two things.
That's great, because there's a Cochrane review out there that I read recently on resiliency. It actually looks at resiliency interventions for healthcare professionals, an area that I'm interested in. Things like mindfulness and ACT and traditional CBT actually has been shown to promote resiliency in healthcare workers, and of course, people with various types of mental and physical conditions as well. But one of the challenges I had with that paper when I read it was it just puts resiliency in the cognitive kind of bucket and doesn't talk about bodily processes. Yeah. And I know that's what you've done in your work, and that's what you continue to do in your work. How have you been able to kind of, like, how do you now view the mind and the body versus maybe how you viewed it before your training and even your personal experience with resiliency from bodily processes as well as the psychological processes?
Yeah, very cool. Great question. So, I was trained as a physiologist, as I mentioned, so very much from a very physical perspective, from a very physiological perspective. Having said that, I have always felt that I've connected with the idea that the mind and body are not separate entities, that we are functioning humans for a reason. And the mind-body dualism that started back in the days of, I think, therefore I am, Rene Descartes, really is a false dichotomy, and it's really one that we've created to try and understand these things. And so I've always really tapped into, I did a one of my weird courses in my undergrad university degree was on it was on the psychology of the mind, and it was one of those things that, like, I just took as an interest. It was before I did my PT degree, and I wrote a paper on the mind-body connection, and I can't for the life of me find it, because we're talking about 30 years ago almost, and I'd love to read what I wrote back then. But a lot of the connection for me is around, and the reason I really connect with this is that I really have felt that that the mind and the body being so integrated, that interoception that you get with knowing, well, what does your heart rate feel like when you're doing things, when you're exercising, or when you're anxious, or when you're under some degrees of stress. And so I've really tried to develop that in terms of myself, and that's right from being a teenager. But I'm a huge Star Wars fan, as you can tell if you can see my background, and if you can't, it's full of Star Wars stuff. Mm-hmm. And it's, for me, the Force is very, very much like mindfulness and the whole concept of mind body. And I think there's so many Star Wars parallels in this. I could go into that for like days, but it's, I don't think that there really should be a dualism. I think the whole basis for biopsychosocial practice, which really doesn't include spiritual and some other aspects of being a whole human, necessarily, that are really, we need to think of people as whole humans. And so, as I said, being trained primarily as a physiologist, being able to come back to some of those beliefs has been really eye-opening. And it's been a huge learning curve, because I don't have, other than that, really that one course, I don't have a lot of psychology in my basic training, for sure.
I think that line, I think, therefore I am, has been rephrased as I feel, therefore I am, which would bring in all the interoceptive processes that you're talking about. Yeah,
absolutely.
Because everything,
which is, I was just gonna say, it's it is all integrated, and it's not just like, the mind is not just thinking, and the mind it's a feeling brain, it's an emotional brain, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. So everything that happens in our body is processed, obviously, and it goes up and then it gets filtered, basically. But oftentimes, helping people be aware of those interoceptive processes helps them with emotion regulation, helps them with cognitive reappraisal, or just dealing with their thoughts, or reframing their thoughts, if you will. Oftentimes we think that it starts with the mind, cognition, or thoughts, but oftentimes it starts actually in the body, which is interesting because then it places us as physical therapists squarely in not only the body aspect of mind-body medicine, but also the mind aspect of mind-body medicine, instead of keeping us, kind of separate. Like physios just work with the body, and whatever mental health providers work with the mind. And I really think that is potentially harmful for patients, but I also know that it keeps us kind of siloed and boxed into areas. But your work is starting to kind of piece all that together, which I think is great.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree, and I think it's really interesting because I mean I'm very open that I still see a therapist for my and a counselor for my mental health, and I think that's an important aspect of it's like going to train exercise and having a coach, and so it doesn't mean something's bad or wrong or it's negative. It's a positive thing. But it's interesting because we talk about this all the time, that our worlds are colliding, and so I talk about the work that I'm doing in the physical realm, which is, you could kind of look at it as a bottom up type processing, that it's coming somatically from the body and having an influence on our thoughts and our emotions. And of course, he coming from the psychology side is also recognizing the opposite. And it'd be interesting because we've had some theoretical discussions about what cognitive or emotional therapy and physical therapy look like 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now. They may be the same profession. And I think that would be to our huge benefit, to the benefit of our clients, if we can develop that sort of melding of what we do.
Well said. I would love to think about that and see those two come together, which I think they already are in some ways, but we've got a little bit of a way to go. All right. So I love Star Wars, by the way, and Yoda's sitting over your right shoulder there. So tell me, how has Yoda informed your view of mindfulness?
Yeah, so it's so cool because, like I said, there's so much in Star Wars, and there's so much in Star Wars in the Force that is just resonates in terms of mindfulness. And so one of the key connections is the concept of awareness, and we know that when we define mindfulness, it really is about purposeful awareness without judgment. And as a generalized description or definition of mindfulness, and the way that Yoda as a Jedi master will teach his Padawans and the kind of his learners, for those that don't speak Star Warsese, it really is about developing awareness. And there's lots of quotes, and I've actually got a few that I think are really fantastic to illustrate this. One of the more common ones that we hear is, fear is the path to the dark side. And so fear being a negative emotion that might be associated with the lack of present moment awareness, potentially, if it's something that doesn't involve a current present moment focus. So fear is the path of the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. And to me, this is like how you become dysregulated emotionally and physiologically, is through that line of thinking. And the way to come out of that is to not be fearful and be non-judgmental and be aware of what's going on. And so here's another one. You must unlearn what you have learned. You will know good from bad when you are calm, peace, passive. And that's another one of Yoda's. And it's, again, it's just sort of recognizing that if you are present in the present moment, able to interocept your I just made up a verb, I don't think that one exists, yourself, and to really recognize what you are experiencing at this moment, that isn't ruminating thoughts, it isn't thinking to the future, it isn't, it's just really that present moment. I think that's that calm, that at peace, that passive, that can really help you discern what's right, what's wrong, what's where things should be. And this one, here's another one that just really resonated with me in my personal journey. Yoda talks to Force Ghost Ben Kenobi in Return of the Jedi, and he says, or actually this is in Empire Strikes Back, and he says, all his life he has looked away to the future, to the horizon. And I'm going to do a really terrible Yoda impression. never his mind was wherever he was. What was he doing? And so he's basically saying that Luke was not present. Luke was not able to be present. He was always looking to the future, trying to improve, trying to change, and never really recognized where he was. And there's just so many more examples of how this concept threads throughout all of the mythos of Star Wars, the movies, the books, all of the things. And then the last one I'll mention is Qui-Gon from the Phantom Menace, the very episode 1 of the prequels. Your focus determines your reality. And I love that concept, is that your focus, if you're focusing on something external, you're not able to focus on the reality of what is present. And this has so many applications, not just for mindfulness, but for mindful practices in physio, in pain management, in exercise training, in really any aspect of life that we think of. So I could go on forever, but I'll stop with those for now anyway.
No, I love that. I mean, I was born in the 70s and raised in the 80s. So Star Wars is, I had Star Wars figures growing up as a kid and played with them and things like that. I wish I still had those figures because they're worth a whole lot of money now. I had a whole room full of them. But what strikes me is I love the quotes you have, and practitioners always ask me, well, how do I use mindfulness with guys? How do I use mindfulness with children? And some of the things that you're doing here in a direct and maybe indirect way is you're making mindfulness approachable.
Yeah.
Right. You're taking something from real life. Someone made this movie. We all know the movie. So there's a context there that we can relate to. And then you take these characters and say, hey, here's how these characters, Luke with his present moment's focus, how he used that to fight the bad guys or become stronger. And I think we need to do that more in our practice with patients. We're very good at kind of the delivery of things, and we're very good at explaining the science. But what I appreciate about, not only your personal story, but then relating to something that you enjoy and you can relate to, and then helping us relate to, I think is really important. Mindfulness is new in PT. It really is. I mean, I just wrote a paper that came out in PTGA on mindfulness and acceptance-based approaches that was just published here in late March. It's still new in our profession. Should it be something that we are adopting more, and not just in pain? Do you see other applications throughout, the other physical therapy specialties?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's absolutely a fantastic question. And kudos on that paper, though, by the way. I did read it, and it's fantastic. And actually the day of recording is when it came out actually in the journal. Yeah, I saw that today. So that's good. Yeah, great paper. Yes, short answer is absolutely yes. This is I teach. So I as part of my university job, I teach in a physical therapy program, and I have an advanced, a couple different exercise prescription courses, but I have an advanced one that used to be very much based on biomechanics and exercise technique and and advanced applications around periodization and things that were very strength and conditioning focused. And in the last 2 to 3 years, I've recognized how unimportant some of those things are compared with the ability to connect with a client and to have the client learn how to connect with their own self and their own mind and their own body and their own emotions and their own physiology. And that doesn't happen through knowing the right reps and sets, or knowing whether you should, have a perfectly neutral lumbar spine when you're deadlifting, or allowing some flexion. Things like that are small fish in the pond. They're fish in the pond, but they're small fish in the pond. Whereas the psychologically informed practices, I think, are the big fish in the pond. They're the ones that are really going to be the biggest targets. So, I mean, for us as physical therapists, of course, yes, we have an involvement in mental health, and of course, pain management, very, very much a part of what we do. And mindfulness is huge in those areas. But I really do think it's, teaching clients and learning how to teach clients how to develop this interoception and really understand where how they can, from both the bottom up body somatic focused perspective, but also a top down mental focused perspective, look at the integrative self and say, okay, well, what does that actually mean for me? And let's say example of exercise recovery. There's some really good evidence to suggest that both psychological and physiological stress reduces adaptations. And so this is, back to your previous question about, or comment about, making mindfulness relevant to individuals. 25 years ago, when I was, just a brand new PT, and if you would have told me I could have do mindfulness and meditate and all this kind of stuff to improve my exercise abilities and recovery, I would have probably laughed and said, there's no way. As much as I was into it, I didn't see the relevance at that point in time. But now there's so much evidence that level of stress can play a part in our adaptations. And those that are under psychological stress don't have the same type of gains in strength and power. If you would have told me that 25 years ago, I would have went, oh, okay, well, maybe as a stressed student or new practitioner, I should pay attention to this. And so I think in terms of exercise recovery, that's big. But also, I think in terms of the whole idea around chronic and systemic inflammation from a physiological perspective is something that underpins so much of our health concerns, particularly in chronic health, but even acute health. And and how that relates to autonomic system and the autonomic dysfunctions that we can see out there is really massive, in my opinion. So I really think that based on what we're seeing, that there are huge applications across inflammatory type diseases. And we do know that quality of life can improve in those type of diseases, but there is a little bit of physical evidence now that mindfulness-based approaches can actually have a physical impact on things like glucose tolerance and insulin regulation, as well as these things around autonomic regulation that we can measure with heart rate variability, as an example. And so I agree with one of the earlier comments that you said that, we've got this tech, and something like heart rate variability is so accessible now that it could be something that very easily translates into what we do as physical therapists, to look at, well, are individuals in the right state to be able to tolerate or handle or work with or excel at whatever we're trying to get them to do, whether it be work with pain, or whether it be work with their mental health or some physical ailments, and even getting into painful stretching or mindful movements that can really get people out of a fight or flight kind of zone, and knowing if that's where they're at. Really some concrete measures that have been shown really well in the research to have some big benefits. Those are the type of things where I think this concept of mindfulness can really have a tangible impact.
I think I picked up something important a couple of moments ago that you said. So the mind body or the brain body connection, this bidirectional connection, right? So it's not just mind body or body mind, is bidirectional. Training that, as you mentioned earlier in the episode, promotes resilience. And then you said something a couple of moments ago, training that also promotes adaptation or adaptability. So I love that, like, resilience plus adaptation in some way probably equals well-being or health and well-being.
Especially when you look at it from a biopsychosocial perspective and not just the mental side or the physical side, for sure.
Right. I like that. And I always try to, in my mind, I try to like piece together equations. Like, if I want to promote someone's well-being or promote their health, then I know I have to train them to be resilient and train them to be adaptable. And that happens obviously both in the body as well as the mind. The other thing that you mentioned is heart rate variability again, and using it in PT practice, which I can pretty much venture to say most PTs don't use that in practice. Can we use that, let's say, in our evaluation as a baseline? And is that one of the kind of biohacking practices that you use personally? And what other ones can we use in practice that you use?
Yeah. So heart rate variability is one that I've really focused on over the last year or so in my personal practice, but again, in my research as well. So short answer is yes, absolutely. So heart rate variability, I mean, there's so many ways. Like right now I'm wearing an Oura ring. Not that I'm promoting any particular product or whatsoever. I have no no conflicts of interest when it comes to those sort of things. But I love my Oura Ring for sleep quality, as well as my recoverability, basically my recovery. And so the very good metrics around the sleep. And so it also has, as well as being able to track your heart rate variability, which you need to, it's not just enough to have a good heart rate monitor, because they'll track heart rate. But what they don't do is they don't look at the specific R to R interval between beats, and to measure that time. And that's what you need to be able to do heart rate variability. And so the Oura Ring is very good to be able to do that. So it tracks your R to R intervals, and it can really give you a sense of what that, when your variability increases or decreases. I mean, there's way more to it than just an increase in heart rate variability. There's not one marker and measure of heart rate variability. There's many of them. But I really like it from that perspective. So the activity monitor that's in here as well is good for sleep quality, and then you combine that with temperature changes that it measures, and the heart rate variability. It's a nice marker of recovery and my sleep quality. I'm starting to use it to guide my training practices, and there's some decent evidence around looking at guiding your, and it's mostly in endurance training, but there's a couple papers in CrossFit actually that have recently come out that look at if you train hard on a day where your recovery and your heart rate variability are low, you don't adapt as well as if you kind of guide your training based on heart rate variability. So on the days that you have a bad recovery day or a heart rate variability day where it's low, if you titrate your training downwards and say, I'm either going to reduce the intensity or the duration, that it doesn't have a negative impact, first of all, on your training ability, and it actually makes your training more efficient. And so you can have potentially better improvement with better recovery with less stress and less overall physiological stress. So there's some decent evidence around that. Lots of other ways to do it too. Like I do heart rate variability biofeedback, and with that right now the Oura Ring doesn't do that, so I need some other measures. So I have a Polar H10 heart rate strap, which is the one that will record the R to R intervals, or one of the better ones. I've also got a Core Sense from Elite HRV. So Elite HRV is another one of the apps that you can use, and it's just it's basically like a finger clip, like oxygen sensor, but it senses the pulse. And so what you can do is you can really modify your heart rate variability by changing the frequency of breathing, the frequency and the depth of breathing. And so it's actually fairly straightforward practice. Now I'm talking about all this cool tech, but there's apps out there that you don't even need a lot of tech. You can actually use your smartphone camera and light that will actually detect that. Now there's the validity on those is a little bit less, and it's improving as the apps are developed, but there's lots of cool ways that you could easily integrate that. And heart rate monitors, let's face it, are not that expensive, even the really good quality ones, so having a few available in the clinic that can do this and just pair them up with a device and really easy to measure. And if you were just to do even a 2 to 5 minute resting baseline at the beginning, maybe not the first day of an assessment, maybe it is, I don't know, but in the beginning, and then just have people track that over time, or maybe each time they come into the clinic, they start by doing something like that. You really get a sense of where they are from an emotional and a physiological autonomic regulation perspective that can help you potentially titrate up or titrate down based on what you're seeing.
I like that. And I think it brings a lot of value to a PT practice, if you will, as well. Bringing technology in that could obviously help someone understand their psychological and their physiological processes. And then us as the professional really is the bridge there that helps people understand what all that data means. Because we do have the apps now. As you mentioned, we do have these ways to bio-track lots of different things. But sometimes when you start to read the data and the reports, it's a little confusing for someone if you don't have a physiology background like yourself or a PT background like we have. And let's face it, health literacy is pretty low out there. So heart rate variability, people get the heart part and all the rest of it is like, I'm not really sure what that means. So I like that you can bring technology and it can add high value quality care to someone's episode of care. I know kind of along those lines of interoception, heart rate variability, I know polyvagal theory is something that interests you. And I know you're starting to do some research in there. Can you give us a little insight about the things you're interested in that area?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been very fortunate actually to I sort of stumbled upon polyvagal theory as part of my personal work that I've been doing, and since then I've met some of the people that are involved in that, and so I'm actually working right now on a paper with Stephen Porges and Marlissa Sullivan, and we're looking at sort of the applications of polyvagal theory in PT, and for me, what it is, so if you're not familiar, polyvagal theory is basically you've got two sort of streams of your vagus nerve that are involved with the parasympathetic nervous system, and one's the dorsal, one's the ventral, and the dorsal vagus complex, as it's called, is the one that's more on the shutdown side. So when we think of the parasympathetic system of, really having things shut down and freeze, it's more involved with that. Whereas the ventral vagal system is more involved with social engagement. And it's the one that if you can really ramp up that ventral vagal complex through things like breath work and mindfulness, that can really impact your ability to feel safe in your environment. And that's sort of the underlying psychological side of things. But physiologically, what that means is that has an impact on your heart rate variability. And so we know that when you are more socially engaged, you have a higher heart rate variability when you're at rest. The interesting part for me, because I'm a strength training guy, and I do, and that's sort of my passion. Well, it's one of them now, is about the balance between running up and running down the systems, and saying that, yes, we're so much sympathetic focused in our daily lives right now, that training people to have a good vagal break, as it's sometimes called, and having the vagus nerve through the ventral vagal complex, like, really be able to be on when it needs to be on. I think we also need to know how to take it off. And it's not enough to just say, oh, we're all in the sympathetic state, so we need to be parasympathetic. I think we need to train individuals to be sympathetic as well. And so, super good example of this is low back pain. And we know that in low back pain, there's tons of muscle rigidity, right? And actually, one of the studies that I did for my master's was on core stability. And so I hear now, don't do core stability because it's going to increase rigidity. And I completely disagree with that, because what core stability isn't about developing stability, right? Even though we use the word stability, to me, it's about teaching the body in the presence of pain to be able to turn those muscles on when needed and turn them back off again immediately. And it's that balance and that jumping from sympathetic to parasympathetic in a regulated state that we can control autonomically, but our body knows how to do that. That's one of the huge missing pieces, in my opinion. So the polyvagal theory stuff is super engaging and intriguing to be able to think about, our systems. It's so applicable to PT.
I like that. So that turning on and off, as you mentioned, to me, there's that adaptability there again. I have the awareness that I know how to modulate my own neuromuscular system. And I'm so on the same page with you. Right now, there's so much about how to quiet the nervous system, how to turn the nervous system down, how to decrease the sense of nervous system. I'm like, people, we need our nervous system to be online. Like, the point of our nervous system is to monitor everything that's happening inside and outside of the body, really, and then to process that. And then it's under our conscious control to decide how we want to respond to that, basically. So they kind of bring a little bit of mindfulness in there with the conscious piece of it. But I'm on board with you. I mean, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater with regard to core stabilization. There's something important there for people who have low back pain and other chronic health conditions. And congratulations, by the way, by collaborating with Stephen Porges and Marlissa Sullivan. I know they've done, obviously, Stephen Porges is the kind of the founder of the theory, so he'll have a lot to contribute. And Marlissa has done some work in polyvagal theory before. She's been on the podcast as well. And I'm not, do you think the PT world is ready for that theory yet? Because it's kind of like my question.
There's lots of controversy. Let's put it that way. Polyvagal theory is controversial, and it's mostly controversial because there hasn't been really shown to be an anatomical distinction between both the dorsal and the ventral vagal complexes. So if people are going to get caught up, it's that they can't see a mechanism directly, and the research hasn't shown that. But I mean, the application from a clinical perspective, both psychological and physiological sides, to me is too hard to ignore. Whether we're ready or not, it depends so much. A typical PT answer, it depends so much on your focus and how much information we can get out, like the articles that you've written and the ones that I'm working on. And, so more information over time, whether we're ready or not, it's coming.
Well, it fits really well into PT as far as I'm concerned. And I know you feel the same way. So we'll look out for that paper. And when it publishes, I'd love to have you and Marlissa and even Stephen on to talk about that. But in the meantime, Scotty, it's been great chatting with you. Let our viewers and listeners know how they can follow you and learn more about your work.
Yeah, most of my handles are The Strength Jedi. So on Instagram and Twitter, The Strength Jedi, or you can search me up on Facebook and get a hold of me that way.
Great. So I want to thank Dr. Scotty Butcher again for being with us this week on the Healing Pain Podcast, talking about biohacking for mind, body, strength, and resilience. You can, of course, follow all his work by following him on his various handles at thestrengthjedi.com. If you're following along with us this week, take a screenshot on your phone and tag us on Instagram at drjoetatta.com and at thestrengthjedi.com, and we'll be sure to tag you back. Thanks for joining us this week, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Healing Pain Podcast with Dr. Joe Tatta. To subscribe to the podcast and learn more, visit Integrative Pain Science Institute.com. That's Integrative Pain Science Institute.com. Sign up to receive weekly updates, leave a review on iTunes, and share this episode with your friends.